Welcome to the seventh and final meeting of the Baltimore Regional Water Governance Task Force. My name is Bill Henry. I'm the comptroller for Baltimore City and chair of the task force. We have a big chunk of work to get through tonight. Those of you who have previous experience with the legislature will recognize tonight's session as a true sausage making endeavor where we will be grinding through all of the comments that we received from individual task force members and working to consolidate that into a cohesive set of recommendations. And I cannot stress this last part enough, a cohesive set of recommendations that we have a supermajority consensus on, reminding everyone, both on the task force and for the viewers at home, per the dictates of the General Assembly and the legislation that organized the task force, our final recommendations must be approved by at least 10 of the 13 members of the task force. So what I am expecting to do is to walk our way through the draft recommendation. I believe Brian and the WSP team are prepared to have the very, very messy draft up on screen that we can work through. And all of you were sent a document entitled RWGTF Topic List for Final Discussion, which is essentially just an outline of that very messy draft with numbered bullet points of individual items that we should address to make sure that we have some measure of consensus on them. And I'm looking to see if there's anything else that we need to start with. One issue, some members may have seen also a document that was sent out at the last minute. It had a set of what I would refer to as findings of fact at the beginning, and that had been an effort to pull out certain ideological statements throughout members' individual comments from the body of the report and just put them up front as items that we would go through and would be the sort of philosophical underpinnings of the rest of the recommendations. But in the conversations I had, there was concern that doing it that way might have bogged us down in philosophical discussion right at the very beginning of the conversation. And that instead, we're not going to try to do that. We're just going to go through the report and, go through the draft and take the individual recommendations as they come. And if a little bit of ideology slips in, it's because either it's not contentious. Well, it's because it's not contentious, or if it's contentious, then it won't get 10 votes, and we won't have to worry about it any longer. Brian, do you have any other slides to show? You don't have anything else to show but that messy draft, right?
Just, I don't know if you want to remind folks of the public comment process.
Oh, okay. So here's, do you want to go back to the schedule part? Yeah. So the hope is that we can get through the bulk of this discussion in roughly the first 2 hours, and then take a break. I know I'm looking at Senator McRae, and he's somewhere between shocked and impressed, which is a good place to be. I will admit to being myself somewhere between optimistic and hopeful, but if we can get through everything and that's the individual sections, we can get through that in the first 2 hours, then we can take a break, and during that break, Brian and his team can collate the changes we'd all agreed to into a final document that we can then go through after we've had a public comment period, and then we can do a final vote on the whole document, which is not quite as simple as it sounds, considering the same 10 people who vote for one part of it may not be the same 10 people who voted for another part of it. And so that's going to have to get straightened out. And we may not be done by 9 o'clock. And I'm acknowledging that. I'm also acknowledging that I'm committed to being here until we are done. And I'm hoping that all the rest of you are as well. If it takes longer than 2 hours to get through the individual points, it takes longer than 2 hours, and that break will come at whatever point we do get through it, and will give us a little time for a respite while they collate the notes from the changes that we made. Before we dive in, does anybody have any questions about any of this? Okay, I'm seeing no hands up. So Ryan has put up the notes for attendees. This is for when we get to the public comment period. This, the instructions on how to raise your hand and how to be recognized. And then I think if there are no questions, we will dive in. If the next thing up on your screen is the messy draft, there we go. Okay, so the first item on the topic list is short-term operational improvements. And this is, oh, actually you can scroll back up.
Yep.
Oh, because it's essentially this. We're still in the summary period at the beginning. Although the first thing I'm going to suggest, if everybody, unless anybody has any objections, is to eliminate the numbering scheme in this first part. This was intended to be sort of an executive summary of the recommendations. And considering that the only delineation really is between short-term and long-term, I'm not sure that there's really still the need to number them. So unless anyone has an objection to that, I'm going to ask that these sections just be taken as regular prose. I think when you consolidate all of this, what you get is in the short term, we recommend that the city of Baltimore assess the feasibility of and actions required to implement. Oh wait, now it is messed up. Okay, in the short term, we recommend a solution based on a variation of option C, with the possibility of analyzing the city breaking. Yeah, that's the part that was the part that we were thrown on. So let me propose this language that consolidates that as, in the short term, we recommend that the city of Baltimore assess the feasibility of and actions required to implement a solution based on a variation of option C, where the city removes the Bureau of Water and Waste, where the city assesses the removing the Bureau of Water and Wastewater from the Department of Public Works so that water and wastewater operations can be run as a separate department, and would continue making operational improvements with the input and assistance of a city-county water advisory committee, and that the county similarly assess programs under the county's Department of Public Works and Transportation. The assessments should consider any impacts to other services and operations of the jurisdictions. Does anybody have questions or comments about that consolidation? Is everybody okay with that consolidation? Oh, wait, I see Ms. Powell.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm trying to follow along with what you're reading and kind of pulling together. I did not hear you say or mention the City County Water Advisory Committee piece, but it's there in that paragraph. Did you omit that?
I said, no, I said the specific phrase is, I'll repeat it. In the short term, we recommend that the City of Baltimore assess the feasibility of and actions required to implement a solution based on a variation of option C, where the city assesses removing the Bureau of Water and Wastewater from the Department of Public Works so that water and wastewater operations can be run as a separate department, and would continue making operational improvements with the input and assistance of a city-county water advisory committee, and that the county similarly assess programs under the county's Department of Public Works and Transportation. And keep in mind, this is just the summary part.
Okay.
Further down is where it goes into detail on both parts of that.
Okay.
Okay. So does anyone have concerns or further questions about that consolidation of language? Dr. Mitchell.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Is it possible, because I think to Ms. Powell's point, maybe I'm stuck. I'm hearing language from you, but I'm reading something different. And it may be that I'm not understanding that the track changes on this document. Is there a final draft language that maybe you can approve the changes for that section so that we can just read the final language and make sure that we all understand the language to be?
I could put it in the chat, or I can ask, Brian, do you have what we call the draft 5?
Yeah, I can switch to that if you like.
Okay. The reason I didn't want to put this up was I didn't want it to look too much like this had already been decided. This was literally just an effort to try to consolidate the language in advance so that if it was messy when we were trying to talk about it during the meeting, we could share chunks at a time. There are chunks of the messy draft that don't get changed significantly, and so this is not as necessary there. But this paragraph is what I just read, starting in the short term and ending in jurisdictions. Ms. Powell.
Thank you for sharing this. I don't think this consolidated draft was shared with us.
It wasn't.
Is it possible that it could be emailed so that, if we can print it out, we can have it to read along as you're going. The
Sure.
question that you raised, is there a concern about consolidation of the language? I'll say for me, yes, because
Okay.
I think that some of the pieces in the markup were left out, and also there were questions raised about the City County Water Advisory Committee that have not been addressed. So consolidating that with the pieces that seem to have agreement, I think is a concern.
Okay, that's fair. What language specifically in the messy draft do we need to make sure gets added back in?
It appears from what I can see of this consolidated draft, there was discussion about the joint planning function.
Oh,
And
we
addressing-
haven't gotten to that.
Okay.
That's literally, so what in the messy draft, there's a bunch of stuff under the number 1
Okay,
for the short term. If you go back, Brian, if you go back to 5, those are 3 different paragraphs here.
okay. So yeah, it would be to avoid doing this and trying to figure out where something may have landed, it would be helpful for us to like
Sure.
be able to read ahead, a little ahead. And since those things are broken out, then I think we should break out that piece as well, because that had several questions.
DR, can you circulate draft 5 to all the task force members?
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Now here's a part that I'm going to have a question for, which is in terms of the questions that you're referring to. The only question I have is, I guess these are okay. They're framed as comments, but I have 2 comments of being unclear about the purpose of the City County Water Advisory Committee and the needing more clarity in what composes it. Would any of the task force members feel interested in explaining the City County Water Advisory Committee? Because if nobody feels like they can describe what it's supposed to do and how it's supposed to work and why it's a good thing, I guess we could take it out. Ms. Buckler.
So I would say it makes a more formal process to what already happens. Right now, there are monthly meetings between the director of DPW in the city and the director of DPWT in the county and their technical staff. But I think this would become a public version of that and take issues that need to be resolved at a higher level, not issues that would go against anybody's charters or existing MOUs or anything like that, but just more routine issues that pop up that need a resolution at a higher level and need some light shown on them and some transparency to them.
All right, I'm going to ask Mr. Moran and Mr. Cavete, whichever one would want to go first, if that explanation is sufficient to address your comments about the city county, or do you have additional comments or questions?
No, I'm sorry, Mr. Chair, can she repeat that?
Lauren, could you, I'm sorry, Ms. Buckler?
Sure. So currently there is a monthly meeting between the city and county directors and their technical staff, but that is not a public meeting, and it is at the technical operational level. I think the vision of this would be something that would happen on a routine basis. It would be public. It would raise issues that are not charter issues, MOU issues, but more routine issues that need to come to light and need a resolution in a public facing way.
Mr. Cabetta? Oh,
Thank you.
I'm sorry. Ms. Moran, was that all?
Thank you. That's helpful.
Okay. Okay. Mr. Cabetta?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. This one, yeah, I guess the only question that remains for me then is this more akin to a governance body or a task force? Because when I read it initially, it read as a hybrid, and that was the reason for my question.
Ms. Buckler?
I would say neither. I would say it's a transparency function between the city that I guess angles more towards governance, but without any official, I don't know what phrasing I want to use here, without any official implications to it besides being able to bring these issues to light and make them public in the hearing of them and the resolution of them between the city and the county.
Which is kind of written into the name advisory committee.
Yes, so not binding is the word I'm looking for, but advisory, to be like, okay, we need to talk through this issue and how are we resolving it.
Dr. Mitchell, then Ms. Powell, and then Ms. Medic. Actually, we're going to go to Dr. Mitchell, then Ms. Medicus, then Ms. Powell.
No, thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess my question, understanding that this city county water advisory committee, our working group, hasn't been discussed in much detail, and seeing that yes, many of us task force members are not quite sure what this represents, or at least I'm not quite sure what it represents, and it seems like there was other questions associated with it. Does it make sense, understanding that whatever comes out, looking at any type of reorganization or assessment thereof, is that maybe the current body that is meeting at the executive level for the city and county maybe report out semi-annually or quarterly, what their findings are and what their progress are, instead of creating another commission that I think that I guess my concern is I'm not too sure of what it is.
So, Dr. Mitchell, you've touched on a structural problem with our task force, which is that the county placed Ms. Buckler as an employee of their DPW on the task force as a member, but did not place any current members of Baltimore City's Department of Public Works on the task force, even though there are a couple former members. So my understanding, and this is where I would check in with, is Mr. Luna on the call? My understanding is that DPW staff at the city level is aware of this proposal and is okay with it. If that is not the case, then I understand we can, definitely share those concerns that Dr. Mitchell is raising. But if Mr. Luna could comment on, whether there has been enough conversation at the staff level about this city county water advisory committee to offer the task force a comfort level with the idea that this is something that we would not be forcing on the department over its objections. Mr. Luna?
Thank you, Chair. If I can confer with some staff first and then respond. I see there's other hands raised by the.
Okay, we'll go to Ms. Medicus and Ms. Powell, and then we'll circle back. Ms. Medicus?
Thank you. I think that I like the idea of the City County Water Advisory Committee. But I feel like it should be better defined at some point before we put it in our final recommendations. And I'm not 100% sure who would be comprising it. I know we're discussing the way the current meetings happen and those people from the city and the county. Would there be any other people on there? What would their task be, their goal? And I also, well, I think I like the idea. I think it needs to be defined a little better. And I really do like the comment from Mr. Cabede about is it possible if that committee is formed by a larger group than just the city and county people that meet currently, they might be a good group to look in to do that due diligence for the further questions regarding option E. So I don't know if that's possible or if anybody's considered that, or maybe I'm completely missing the purpose of the advisory committee, but those are my thoughts.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Powell?
I'll just build on that. I think it needs more definition, clear definition. As it stands, the preceding text says, continue making operational improvements with the input and assistance of an advisory committee. And that makes it unclear to me based on what Ms. Buckler shared as to what the scope and focus of an advisory committee would be. So because there are still questions about it, I would request that that be decoupled from the language that you read previously.
Okay, this is another point where I'm going to say, I'm going to remind the task force that these opening paragraphs are literally summaries of concepts that are expanded on further down and frankly have already been circulated and were available for review. So if you scroll down to phase 1 short term, the second paragraph of this document, in fact, Brian, you can just scroll down to the paragraph that starts with, next we recommend establishing a professional city-county water advisory committee / working group to ensure that the current operation is strengthened and accountable to all ratepayers of the system. It goes on to discuss who the composition would be and what the scope of issues that it would cover would be, and talks about prospective specific experience that appointees would have. And then below it are specific operational issues that we would recommend be addressed in the short term, including transparency, equity, and further down, improving the intermunicipal agreements. So I'm now beginning to wonder if maybe it might be more effective to skip the executive summary and instead start with the more detailed phase 1 and phase 2 parts, and then come back and do the executive summary at the end after we've discussed the items in more complete in a more complete sense. Do I have the will of the body to go in that order instead, to possibly alleviate some of the questions and concerns about details we haven't gotten to yet?
Yeah, I think we need to.
Yes.
Okay, so let's start with phase 1. And first, we recommend immediate improvement measures as described in our ongoing. Second, and this is where it gets messy again. So if you go to draft 5, this paragraph is consolidated as, I'm sorry, Brian, we're gonna have to ask you to switch back to page 5. Yeah. So that's the phrasing that would be recommended for the city studying the prospect of returning water and wastewater to a standalone department. My expectation was that there were comments and questions about whether we would be recommending that stormwater go with the department or not. And that was a topic that would have to be addressed. Is there anyone who prefers to address that topic first, or should we take the overall paragraph first and then take up that topic second? All right, I'm seeing no hands raised, but I've also, okay, I'm seeing, okay. So in that case, does anybody, other than the issue of stormwater, does anybody have questions or comments or concerns about this paragraph? Ms. Buckler.
How will this work with procurement in the city, with the vision there?
I'm sorry, could you be more specific?
Will this change anything currently with procurement?
I don't know why it would.
I
Why
don't
would
know.
you?
I'm just trying to figure out. I get that it's gonna potentially elevate salaries and some of the other things that it's mentioning. But how is this changing some of the day-to-day backlogs that we're seeing related to procurement? I just want to make sure it's not supposed to do that.
Well, it's not, I wouldn't expect it to have a direct impact on procurement. It would just mean that maybe inside procurement, the team that is responsible for DPW might reorganize in some fashion. But I will also point out that it is a recommendation that the city study the prospect. And the impact of service delivery and the impact of how it addresses the agencies and bureaus' cooperation with other city agencies would be part of that assessment. Dr. Mitchell, then Mr. Kubeta.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Question for you, and then maybe I may not be understanding the document properly again, but in the summary that we were looking at in executive summary, I think number 1, it was mentioning that this work will be done for the city and the county.
Mm-hmm.
But in looking at this, it only referenced the city. Is there a reason why that summary includes the county, but this doesn't?
I think because you've caught an oversight in our editing. So the phrase, the county similarly assess programs under the county's Department of Public Works and Transportation, and the assessment should consider any impact to other services and jurisdictions, that should be copied to this paragraph as well.
And your referencing the bolded paragraph there at the first sentence, correct? Where it should be cut and paste or copy to.
Um,
Oh, yeah.
Well,
You can tell me if you want it somewhere else. That's fine too.
yeah, I guess, well, in that case, it would, actually, let me ask Ms. Buckler before we make a silly change. Is water and wastewater a separate bureau inside the county Department of Public Works?
Yes and no, kind of. It's mixed into a couple bureaus. There's a Bureau of Utilities, the Engineering Bureau has staff related to it. So it's a little more confusing than the city's layout.
I think then the way we would do this is, Brian, in that first sentence, we recommend that the city and the county study the prospect of returning the existing water and wastewater bureau or functions to a standalone water, wastewater, and possibly stormwater department. And that would accommodate both jurisdictions.
How about that?
Well, that is definitely what it would look like. Yes. I still have comments from Mr. Cabetta and then Ms. Powell.
Yes, the comment that I had offered up, and this might be something that the city DPW can answer, is just potentially the level of complexity and decoupling water, wastewater from solid waste. As far as I understand it, that there might be some resource sharing benefits that solid waste has currently, and so have we thought through, how possible it is or how difficult it might be to decouple?
Since it is way too early in the evening for me to be justifiably snippy, I will simply repeat, we are encouraging the county and the city to study the prospect. I think it would be micromanaging for us to question how that study would turn out. Ms. Powell.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I don't know if the county ever had a standalone water.
Yeah, I
water
questioned whether
department,
we could
so
get away
just-
with the returning. Yeah.
But I do think that it is, I think it's worth noting, particularly the footnote that you have for the city.
Technically, it would be returning / establishing, because we're talking about the city first and then the county.
Yeah, thank you.
But yeah, I think I get that. Brian, that work?
Yeah, I was just trying to not have to redo the footnote, but that was
Yeah,
just...
I appreciate it. Ms. Powell, was there more? Okay. Mr. Luna, are you able to comment on behalf of the city DPW?
Yes, I think 2 points. First, to the chair's point, yes, this is the recommendation from the task force. The city would still have to further evaluate this and do that proper studying. To Mr. Cavetta's point, yes, there are shared resources within the current Department of Public Works that administrative staff working behind the scenes that support both the Bureau of Water and Wastewater and the Bureau of Solid Waste. So it would take an effort to decouple those items.
But I mean, in the scheme of things, we went through something similar just a couple of years ago, decoupling the housing authority from the Department of Housing and Community Development, and shared resources were an issue, but the decision was it was not an issue that was sufficient to negate the positives gained. And while it was more than just a couple of years ago, we have decoupled both the former Bureau of General Services and the former Bureau of Transportation from DPW at different points over the course of the last 15 years, maybe 15 to 20. It's definitely a plausible concept, and we are not recommending straight out that they do it, which, as Mr. Cabetta has pointed out, there are many items that we should consider before we would make such a decision. But to recommend that the city and the county study the prospect, I think we just have to decide whether this makes sufficient a sufficient case that it's something the city should consider doing. And if we agree that it's worth considering, then we can recommend that the city and the county study it. So with that being said, were there any other questions, concerns, or issues with this paragraph before I ask specifically about stormwater? All right, seeing none, does anybody have strong feelings about whether stormwater should or should not be broken out as well to be part of a standalone department in terms of asking the city to study the prospect? Because theoretically, we could leave stormwater in for them to study, and the city might look at the whole situation and say, okay, we're going to do this, but we're going to leave stormwater out of it because we think that there's synergy with sanitation and solid waste. And that freedom is there. If we don't put solid waste into the if we don't put stormwater into the recommendation, then we might find ourselves in a similar situation to where we were at the beginning of this process, where the legislature had not put stormwater in to things we should look at, and we spent a chunk of a meeting just talking about whether we should look at it or not. I see Mr. Barr and then Ms. Powell.
Yeah, real quickly, Brian just shared a note with us that we took a vote in meeting 2 regarding stormwater.
Yeah.
I don't remember the particulars of that, but apparently we did try to address that.
We took a vote that we were authorizing the consultants to research stormwater for us when they were doing the rest of their study. But that's still kind of my point, is that we're not necessarily going to be around for the city or the county's internal studies of whether or not to create standalone water departments, because we're not recommending that another task force take this issue up. We're just telling the city and the county, you should go look at it. Ms. Powell, then Ms. Medicus.
From what I recalled, and I made the edit, so I'll just speak to why I made the edit. From what I recalled, stormwater was the responsibility of the Water Wastewater Bureau. That may be different now, but it was under Water and Wastewater Bureau's purview.
I believe it still is, yes.
Okay.
Ms. Medicus?
I do not see any reason not to include stormwater for the city and the counties to consider as part of their study, and let them decide if it makes sense or not. And then it will have been thoroughly reviewed and decided, and either it is or it isn't. Makes sense to me.
Thank you. So asking again, are there any other questions or concerns about this paragraph? Because unless there are further questions or concerns, I would ask for a motion to accept this paragraph as now currently written.
So moved, Mr. Chair.
Moved by Mr. Barr. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Ms. Reed. All in favor, say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. We have our first set of agreements. Phase 1, short term, first paragraph. All right, moving down to next. This is where we're talking about the City County Water Advisory Committee. We recommend establishing a professional City County Water Advisory Committee to ensure that the current operation is strengthened and accountable to all ratepayers of the system. Members would be selected by the Mayor of Baltimore and the Baltimore County Executive, with the committee's scope of work including, but not limited to, engagement in long-term planning, drought response, capacity planning, CIP prioritization, customer service and support, and water and sewer billing issues. The appointees to the committee shall have specific expertise and experience in one or more of the following disciplines: water resources management and protection, management and operations of water and wastewater systems, environmental finance, human resources management, environmental justice and equity, or other disciplines relevant to management and operation of a water and wastewater system. The appointed committee shall hold public meetings on a recurring basis to review, discuss, and make recommendations to strengthen current operation of the system to better address current and future challenges. Do we have any questions or comments about that paragraph?
Mr. Chair, Tim Barr,
Yes,
in the draft, and I just wasn't carried, I'd also suggested that perhaps the governor's office might want to have a representative that sits on this advisory.
You have caught an editing issue because that is in there, but it is not in here. So if Brian, if you can add,
Yeah, unless there's an objection by any members of the committee.
I don't think anybody objected to that.
Okay, thank you.
I think that was just an oversight.
Okay, thank you.
By the mayor, the county executive, and the governor.
Mhm.
Any other? Okay. I see Ms. Reed and then Mr. Moran.
Actually, Mr. Moran had his hand up first, Mr. Chair.
Okay.
I will defer to him if he wants to go
Go
first.
ahead, Ms. Reed, go ahead, please.
Okay. I think the idea of having a public light on decisions that are made as opposed to being done just with staff is a good idea in terms of improvements for all of the customers to the system. I was just wondering, my question is, is this going away after the due diligence is done by whatever group succeeds us to determine which one of the governance structures is the best one for the region?
That's a great question, and one that I personally am 100% comfortable kicking down the road, because it was clear, and we'll get to that part. It's clear that we're going to take several years to do the due diligence. So this structure has some time to be up and running and doing stuff while they're still doing the due diligence. If they get to the end of their work, decide to move forward with a different structure, then I would imagine either that second group would make a recommendation about the City County Water Advisory Committee, or depending on how that recommendation is structured, it may not be inconsistent to let this committee keep doing its work also. I mean, that would be something that is probably premature to try to figure out now. So I don't think these two are mutually exclusive, I guess is what I'm saying. I think we could definitely do this, and if we get rid of it when we do something else, then that decision is a decision to be made at the time. Mr. Moran, and then I'm looking down to make sure that I've got all three, Mr. Cabetta, Ms. Powell, and Dr. Mitchell. But Mr. Moran first.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just to clarify, I want to make sure I'm looking at the same thing, because there was a mention that the governor was not included in this, and the copies I'm looking at, the governor was clearly included in these paragraphs.
Yeah, the marked up copy we were.
Okay, I'm looking at two different copies, I guess,
Yeah.
here that were sent out the other day. So, and then second of all, what is the I understand the composition from the standpoint of representatives from the city, from the county, and a representative or representatives from the governor's office. What's the number, you know, what are we looking at numbers wise here? And you know, I understand what the city has at stake here and what the county has at stake, and how many people participate or get their water from both those entities. But then, you know, the governor's office is a different thing altogether. So what does this look like?
So I can tell you that this was the this was the language that was added. There was no language suggested that specified composition. My suspicion is that if we were to recommend this as is, what we would be doing is leaving it up to the mayor, the county executive, and the governor to agree on a composition structure.
Okay.
If we felt like we could ourselves today come up with a composition structure and get 10 votes to agree on it, that is within our purview. You may have noticed that at the beginning of this meeting, I referred to myself as hopeful and optimistic. That some of that hope and optimism came from the fact that I was not expecting to come up with a composition structure for this on the fly.
Okay, and I'm not suggesting we do,
Okay.
Mr. Chair, by
Okay.
any stretch of the we can kick that down the can down the road and let others.
Well, this one
work
would
on
not
that.
be so much kicking it down the road as much as kicking it over into somebody's yard.
Right.
And that
Exactly.
somebody is
Just
the
next
mayor,
door.
the county executive, and the governor.
It's off of my lawn. Thank you.
Right. It's off
Okay.
our lawn. That's the important thing.
Thank you.
Mr. Cabetta, then Ms. Powell, then Dr. Mitchell.
Yes, just wanted to verbalize the comment that I provided, just asking for consideration of including the wholesale customers, namely Howard,
that's good.
Hartford, and Carroll. And I believe the comment was for this committee as well as the other body that was recommended elsewhere in the proposal.
My understanding, and I'm happy to be corrected on this, but my understanding is that is who the governor is representing. The governor represents all the other counties. Okay, Ms. Powell.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I kind of go back to my original comments. It does, the language here is more detailed about this advisory committee. However, when I look back at the recommendations that were made and where this came from, the focus of the City County Water Advisory Committee, which you said the city agreed to, and it may have been based on what was in the report. This was supposed to be a working group limited to a certain scope to focus on immediate short-term measures or improvements in the operation. With the members of that working group or advisory committee selected by the mayor and the county executive. It didn't mention the governor's office here. It mentioned the governor of Maryland under the long-term recommendation. So I feel that going beyond the city and county working group or committee to address or identify these short-term improvements starts to get into more long-term governance structure. And it does raise the question as to the timing of this, even though there on the screen, it says specific operational issues, which should also be addressed in the short term. But I think this is kind of mixing two different bodies, if you will, for two different purposes.
At the risk of just speaking baldly, I have been interpreting the desire to move forward with something like this City County Water Advisory Committee as a way to institutionalize regional cooperation immediately in a way that does not interfere or conflict with anybody's existing operations, in a way that does not raise concerns about debt service or human resources. The City County Advisory Committee is simply an opportunity to have stakeholders from outside the city being involved and engaged on a regular basis in an open and transparent fashion. And the specific operational issues that they're addressing are those ones that I think you're speaking of. The idea of a cost of service study to provide ratepayers with a clear understanding of how their water bills translate, the joint equity assessment. And my suspicion is that while that joint equity assessment may have originally come from joint between the city and the county, I suspect it could also be performing a joint equity assessment with the professional working group that's being recommended in the long term, which is also supposed to be doing an equity assessment. And I suspect that the working group and the Water Advisory Committee could work together on that particular effort. But most importantly, it's about the intermunicipal agreement improvements. And like you said, these are things that are immediate issues. They may have long-term governance impact, but they are issues that we can address immediately. And I think it would benefit all of us to be working together when we're doing it. So I am saying this less as a particularly strong advocate of doing a City County Water Advisory Committee, and more from the perspective of institutionalizing cooperation is always a good idea. I don't see what the potential downside is of this, such that we should worry so much about whether or not we should do it. It will undoubtedly have the benefits that come with regular cooperation, and I'm unaware of what the disadvantages could be of an advisory group in which smart, experienced people get together to add their ideas, thoughts, and experience to what we're already paying in terms of management resources for the system. Dr. Mitchell.
It could, Mr. Chair, could I
Oh, I'm sorry.
just
Ms. Powell, yeah.
respond to that and just say for the record, the question isn't whether or not there should be some type of advisory or working group, at least my question. I just think that we should be clear about the scope and what's being established in terms of the language here for constructing or putting that advisory committee in place for us to reach agreement. So
In that case, let me reframe a question to you. Okay, if you're saying your issue is with the wording and you're talking about the specifics of the scope, then are there specific items that you would be opposed to being part of the scope that you would like removed, or are you asking to have other things added to the scope?
I'm not asking to have other things added to the scope. I think the language that was in the recommendation in the report on pages 61 and looks like well, maybe. Well, 61, I think it starts, seem to be language that may have been agreed to. As you referenced earlier, you thought this was something that the city of Baltimore and the county agreed to. I do understand my colleagues' request about engaging the wholesale customers as well. So that would be my recommended change, that the wholesale customers be engaged in that working group or advisory committee.
And so are you saying that you don't feel the governor can sufficiently represent the wholesale customers?
I don't know that the governor I don't know the familiarity that the governor has with the wholesale customers concerns. I don't know. But you know,
okay.
That is not consistent with what's in the report, and I think there was agreement there. If you reference what the city of Baltimore was in agreement with, perhaps we should defer the language.
I'm sorry, are you saying that the report does include a representative from the wholesale customers?
It did not. I'm saying that would be the addition.
Yeah.
That, as Mr. Kavide suggested, the one addition to the what's in the report. What's in the report had the governor listed under the long-term recommendation, not the short-term for operational improvements and all of these other things.
Okay, well,
point.
Okay, so Mr. Luna, I'm going to have to put you on the spot. Did the city, the DPW expect that the City County Water Advisory Committee would include representatives selected by the mayor, the county executive, the governor, the wholesale customers, and representatives from the wholesale customers?
On the short-term aspect of this advisory committee, our understanding was it was just the city and the county making those appointments.
So we would already be going past what the city and the county were expecting when we're adding the governor. But so Ms. Powell, you're asking that we are adding the governor and, as Mr. Cabetta recommended, representatives of the wholesale customers.
No, sir, to clarify, I wasn't asking to add the governor. I'm saying that the governor was not included in the short-term advisory committee. That was under the long-term for option E. What I was agreeing with my colleague that perhaps wholesale customers should be represented on the advisory committee, but that could perhaps be addressed through the appointments of the city and the county.
I think that's I think that would be a very workable compromise. Dr. Mitchell.
Yes, thank you. I had a few items, and it's just some technical language and some other items. So from a technical standpoint, the City and County Water Advisory Committee, it will be selected by the mayor and the county exec. And from the short term, I wasn't familiar that the governor's office would be there. My concern with that is just having the governor's office in those day-to-day transactions. My understanding was that the governor's office will potentially be included in the long term, potentially option E.
If I could interrupt for just a second, because I just want to make sure that this is clear. This would not be asking for staff from the governor's office. This would be allowing the governor to also nominate appointees to the committee who have specific expertise and experience in water resources management and protection, management and operations of water and wastewater systems, environmental finance, etc. It's an appointing opportunity, not a we're expecting some assistant to the governor to show up at these meetings, just to be clear.
Yeah, thank you for that clarity, and I definitely understand. But again, I believe that I thought that the governor's office would be in a long-term area of this. The second piece, in the third sentence, it says that members will be selected by the mayor of the city of Baltimore City and the Baltimore County Executive. But later on, it says in the next sentence, the appointees. And we probably would like to keep clear with the language, which is the selected members of the committee. And then down further, the last sentence, it says the appointed.
No, Brian, hold up.
It also
keep going, Dr. Mitchell.
The last sentence there says the appointed committees, which is that we probably should say selected committee members shall hold public meetings.
I'm going to say that you raise a good point, and that in the principle of less work, it should be, we should change selected to appointed. That way we only have to make one change.
I would prefer that we make selected the key word instead of appointed.
Why?
I just believe that's just a good word, but again, that's just what I believe. The second piece is the equity area. We're addressing equity in the long-term solution, if I'm not mistaken. And so it may make sense, since equity is a bigger issue based upon the programs that are being run through the different jurisdictions, is that we potentially strike that and make that the longer term assessment of this task force. So potentially striking equity and then moving that work to the longer portion of this, if that makes sense.
The pushback I will provide there is the due diligence for the long-term solution is expected to go over a period of years. And that was why I was pointing out that perhaps this could be a joint equity assessment, so that the City County Water Advisory Committee could take advantage of and use the results of it perhaps sooner. The the professional working group that would be doing the due diligence would be using the results of the equity assessment to continue their discussion and assessment of what's the best way to do a regional governance structure. Whereas as soon as we have conclusions from a joint equity assessment, the City County Water Advisory Committee can immediately start addressing it. So I can see why we would not want to perform and pay for two separate equity assessments, but I don't think it would be a good idea to not have the City County Water Advisory Committee, to not have the water and wastewater system trying to address equity as quickly as possible.
That's perfect. And again, this is an advisory committee. So like I mentioned earlier, I think selected would be the appropriate word as
Since
place,
it's only going to
yeah.
cost Brian a little extra time to replace appointees with selected twice, I am happy to make the task force members happy wherever possible.
Thank you,
Ms.
Mr.
Reed.
Chair.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to emphasize that I really do think it's important to keep the governor or the wholesale customers, however we want to do it. But to have it be the advisory committee to be more than just the city and the county representatives, because today there's already a mechanism for having the city and the county talk to each other. But I think in moving forward to some of the reforms, some of the short-term reforms we're trying to get, I think a different thing needs to be done.
So I think what I would suggest is right now, if all the task force members could, just making sure everybody's hand is down, if I could see a show of hands, please raise your virtual hand if possible, or at least if you have your camera off, raise your virtual hand. If you want to raise your real hand, you can do that. If you feel that it is important to have the governor be a member of this advisory committee, please raise your hand. Okay, so with only 4 members, we're nowhere near the threshold for including the governor. If you think, Mr. Barr, if you could pull your hand down, because we're going to ask if you think it's important to have a representative from the wholesale customers, please raise your hand. All right, I see 6 hands. So again, nowhere near the threshold to include either the governor or the representative of the wholesale customers in this. With the existing language we have for this paragraph, and actually we will take them all together if you can. Yeah, well, you can't show it all at once, but actually okay, good job, Ryan. Do we have, Dr. Mitchell?
No, I was saying, if you could scroll down, I would like to be able to read this section that's on the screen. I don't believe we read through that, but I just want to make sure.
What is on the screen right now is the remaining section of short term that we have not approved. So does anybody have any remaining questions, comments, or concerns about what is on the screen? Okay.
Just one,
Dr. Mitchell.
Mr. Chair, under municipal agreement improvements, contract administration memorandum, can someone explain exactly what that means? So I'm clear.
Would anybody like to take Dr. Mitchell up on that? If nobody who was involved in writing this is willing to describe it or explain it, I'm going to suggest that Brian remove it. So would anyone like to explain what prepare a contract administration memorandum to document procedures for use specifically means? Lauren, I'm sorry, Ms. Buckler.
So I think what that would mean would be to, get through some annual changes to the intermunicipal agreements. We have these agreements. There's areas for improvement. There's areas for improvement that are talked about in the new Gen report that is the basis of this work group. So to start getting through some of these pieces and document the procedures and cost sharing allocations is a good thing to start working through piecemeal
on. Dr. Mitchell, does that answer your question?
No, it does, but Lauren, could you just expand on, I know that there's other agreements to deal with the CAM. Are you referring that that we will reopen the CAM and document any procedural changes to that process? I just want to make sure I understand that very clearly, because I think that's important for us to understand clearly.
I think there are regular discussions every time we go through the CAM on things that need to be tweaked. And I think that should be a more formalized process. If we're tweaking that agreement every year, you should be then documenting that, and that should be amended into the agreement. So yes, that would be included.
And would that be included as prepare a contract administration memorandum? Is it just the CAM, or is it other changes to the intermunicipal agreement? I just want to make sure, because there may be some nuances to the language that will make it maybe more holistic based upon what you're speaking to.
I think it would be all the agreements. We on a regular basis, Dr. Mitchell, when you were in the director role, we run the monthly meetings and we were talking through different things and different processes. So formalizing some of those conversations, because although you and the current director and the director of my director agree to have these meetings, there's nothing formal in place when those directors change to ensure that these conversations are continuing. So this would be formalizing that process and that collaboration.
Okay. Senator McRae?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just thought that, and I talked with you about this offline, staffing challenges was one of the bigger issues. And I think one of the main reasons why we ran into a number of the issues there. I'm not sure that I see that represented in reference to this body of city and county that will be working together for a number of the issues. I guess if you could just pulse check the body to see if they agree with that temperature around staffing challenges. And if there is a group of 10, I would like to see that put in there, because that was the crux of the issues that when I went to visit the number of the plants, it was just that the training, the lack of staff, the vacancy, The attrition of staff was the bigger issue to me, just to me.
Is there anyone who objects to adding staffing challenges to the list of items under the committee scope, perhaps between long-term planning and drought response? Hearing no objection, Senator, I think your well-raised point has been made a friendly amendment. So up here, yeah, right there. I thought there was another hand up after Senator McRae, but I don't see anybody's hand anymore. So this is where I asked. Oh, we're still waiting for Brian to type staffing challenges. There we go. So Dr. Mitchell.
Yes, just maybe a friendly amendment under the intermunicipal agreement improvements. Maybe review and potentially prepare. I know there's some processes in place for CAM and some of the other process. So maybe we can say just review and then potentially prepare a contract based upon what we know. I know that there are some process and procedures in place, so review and maybe revise.
So milestone deadlines for developing annual cost sharing allocations and review, revise and prepare.
So
a contract administration memorandum.
Review and revise.
So okay, before we add that, does anybody have any concerns about adding that language? None? All right, without objection, another friendly amendment is accepted. Review and revise the.
It sounded like you also wanted to reference the cost allocation model here, kind of the other.
Is that what you're referring to, the cost allocation model
itself, right? There's two things that we could use the acronym CAM for, which is potentially dangerous. So
yeah, I would prefer that we not simply say CAM, correct, given that we're talking about a contract administration memorandum right after.
I would, if possible, just state review and revise the contract administration memorandum, and just keep it at that. So just add review and revise.
Oh, you are talking about the contract administration memorandum.
That's what I wanted to make clear.
Oh, so what's the difference between review and revise compared to prepare?
Prepare, you may be preparing as if there's no other process and procedures are in place. So if there's other process and procedures in place, you're reviewing those and revise them as needed.
Okay, gotcha. Neil, yes, you were the other one that had the hand up.
Yeah, again, it had to do with the fact that, I think the original language came from us, and it was an intent to document the procedures that are out there. It seemed like historically they were subject to interpretation dependent on the people that were there. So the contract administration memorandum's point was to basically create a procedures manual. So that is distinct from review and revise the model. So they were meant to be two different things.
And that was my hesitancy, because probably none exists quite yet, right? As far as the memorandum, that's why we recommended it.
Okay. All right. Thank you. And so, are there any other questions, comments, or concerns about what is on the screen? Seeing no hands up, Ms. Powell.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. With that explanation by Brian and Neil, I just wanted to be clear on what contract administration are we referring to? Are these capital improvement project contracts, or is this referring to the intermunicipal agreement administration or management itself, documenting that in SOPs? What can you clarify what we're?
So Brian, you're gonna take this?
Yeah, it's with respect to the intermunicipal agreement. It's not for, managing other capital improvement projects that you might have going on.
Okay, because I was thinking about contract administration, and what that might have to do with
Right.
what's going on here. Should we change contract administration to IMA SOP or administration?
For clarity, that could work.
Clarity, thank you.
It's a usual term, but here it could be confusing. And that was the point that I was getting to with, there's a recommendation to create this and none actually exists as of yet. So reviewing and revising something that doesn't yet exist.
Yeah.
Right.
Because I think from Dr. Mitchell's explanation, based on the read of that, it sounds like there's something that exists with regard to contract administration. But
and to the best of my knowledge, there is not. There is a cost allocation model that is the heart of cost sharing in the intermunicipal agreement. And the reference to a contract administration memorandum was really to codify the procedures for its use. There's ambivalent terms, archaic terms, that are in the cost allocation model that, various people have talked about. And frankly, I've said to some extent, we're not exactly sure what this little term or this little equation means. So it seemed worthwhile to start to kind of clarify those and establish them. And again, in the instance that there is high staff turnover, try to set a set of procedures so there's kind of a go-to manual about how to use the cost allocation model. Reviewing the cost allocation model or its role in the intermunicipal agreement is kind of a separate task.
Agree. And just looking at other IMAs, they are not typically referenced as a contract administration. We may want to put in place more details. So reviewing the IMA and developing standard procedures or something like that. The contract administration threw me off as well. But thank you for the clarity.
So what are we going to call it? We're just going to call it the administration memorandum? Technically, that wasn't intended to be a rhetorical question. I like, we eliminated contract. We did not add anything else. Are we okay with just calling it the administration memorandum, or should we be calling it something else?
I think that if I was to give a friendly suggestion, Mr. Chair, is that at the top, if we want to review the IMA, we can just add it as a task at the top and just remove this section here. It sounds like this came as a recommendation of the consultant, and many of the task force members are just may not understand it. And to be clear, can we just add at the top is review IMA processes?
So adding to the committee's scope of work including but not limited to reviewing the intermunicipal agreement.
Correct.
Okay, and then we just cut this third paragraph here down at the bottom.
Just a suggestion for the group. to
Does
consider.
anybody have any objections to that? I almost called on you, Dr. Mitchell, because your hand was up, but then I remembered you wouldn't be objecting to your suggestion. Okay, well then, yeah, I guess that's what we'll do. And so then you can just cut the entire third paragraph down there. So with those changes made, I would like to entertain a motion to accept this section of recommendations. Is there such a motion?
So move, Mr. Chair.
I have a motion from Mr. Barr. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Seconded by Ms. Buckler. All in favor, please raise your hand, virtual or real, so that I can get a count. I see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. We have unanimous agreement on the remainder of the short-term section. Okay. All right, so I will say at this point, Senator McRae, my optimism is taking a beating, but I'm not sure if we're going to get through phase 2 and the executive summary in 29 minutes. But we're making good time. So I remain optimistic and hopeful overall. Okay. This is where we have lots of suggestions on how, oh, I'm sorry, you should probably move back to the messy draft for this part before we look at the cleaner one, just to make sure people see exactly what we're doing. So I understand that there was a willingness on behalf of the reps who had, the members who had suggested these 4 bullet points, that we're okay with removing those bullet points. And I just want to say that out loud to make sure that no one is caught off guard by that. That would, because I got that information secondhand and I'm just checking in. But we, as I discussed at the beginning of the meeting, my understanding is that we are good with not having these statements, and some others that were also suggested have been taken out. This part, like I said, got messy, and I'm going to go back to the topic list where, to some extent, one of the things we need to address is just a basic approach to how we want to frame our long-term recommendation. And the way, the 2 different versions of it that people have suggested basically boil down to one version where we say we're recommending option E, and before we implement it, we have to do some more due diligence. And the other way of coming at it is to say we can't recommend option E without doing more due diligence. So what we're recommending is we do more due diligence. And I personally am more comfortable with that latter approach. And so I want to ask if there is anyone who feels strongly about the need to definitely recommend option E and then acknowledge that we still have to do all this due diligence before we could put it into implementation. And if someone would like to make that case, this would be a good time. Otherwise, I'm going to ask for a vote on the approach where we acknowledge that we can't recommend option E absent the due diligence. And so what we're recommending is further study on some type of regional governance approach. Is there anyone who would like to make the case for the former approach? Seeing none, I'm gonna suggest now this would be where, Brian, if you want to go back to draft 5, the long-term section. This is the phrasing that we have for that further evaluation. And if you can scroll down a little bit further, I think there's one more subcategory, yeah, operational. So those are the next topic that I would ask that we consider. And I would ask, does anybody have questions, comments, or concern about any of this wording?
Mr. Chair, I have a question for you.
Yes, sir, Mr. Moran.
Yeah, so you're saying, I'm looking at this, and this is all in the context of option E, but you're saying view these in the absence of option E? I just want to be very clear here what we're saying.
What I'm saying is that while a regional governance structure of some type addresses, and actually, you know what, I have the wording for this is I stole it and moved it up to the front in the executive summary. For the long term, we acknowledge that while option E shows promise in addressing regional concerns about the existing governance structure, with which the other options do not, the task force does not have time to perform the requisite due diligence which simply recommending option E requires. Further analysis and assessment. And
I just I guess maybe I'm looking at the wrong thing, because I do not have the same language in B as you do, and maybe okay.
Oh, it's on the screen.
Right. Okay. Sorry. I see all of these issues to be discussed or assessed, and the language up there is okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
Nothing else.
Dr. Mitchell.
Yes, Mr. Chair. As I look at the opening statement, before implementing and transitioning to a regional governance structure, does it make sense based upon the discussion today to say, before considering any regional governance structure, that makes it it makes it look like if we're not trying to get to an end and we're truly doing the work of considering and really doing the work of equity, financial considerations, human capital, legal, and operations before we get to a conclusion. So this doesn't drive us to that conclusion. This gets us to uncovering all the hurdles that could potentially lead to a decision or a recommendation.
Are there any concerns about replacing implementing and transitioning to with considering? Seeing no objection, the friendly amendment is accepted. Any other questions, comments, or concerns? Okay. I would love to entertain a motion that we accept this section of the long-term recommendations as currently written on the screen.
I'll make a motion.
That moved by Ms. Buckler. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Ms. Reed. Please raise your hand, virtual or real, to show whether you're okay with this. All in favor? I see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. I see, well, wait, now people, wow, it shifted. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. I see 12 yeses. So we are going to accept this this section of the long term. Are there any opposed? I saw, and we have one no from Mr. Moran. All right. We go to now the next part would start with additionally we recommend. There we go. Let's do this paragraph separately before we go below it. We recommend that the professional working group assess the workability of a city-county rate board with the express purpose of bringing equity to consumers and addressing the current disparity between the current city and county rates. We expect that such a rate board would consist of appointees from the mayor and county executives and would establish yearly rates for consumers, with its exact composition being determined by the professional working group. Does anybody have questions, comments, or concerns? I see a hand up from Mr. Barr.
No,
You were still voting. I was still voting too.
Okay, all right. Yeah, I was definitely from before. Sorry. Apologize, Mr. Chair.
Does anybody else have any questions or concerns about this section? If there are no questions or Ms. Powell?
Yes, Mr. Chair. I think we had a lengthy discussion on this, and there were a number of questions raised that were not necessarily addressed. I think this was a recommendation that came from the consultants, and there was, yeah, I don't think there was complete agreement with this. There were concerns about for a future, if there were to be a future regional governance structure implemented, the conflict between that particular board's rate setting authority and, you know, the authority of such a rate board, which has not been vetted. So I think I think if you were to look at rate setting and the authority for rate setting, that should be part of the comprehensive evaluation that is done for regional governance structure. I don't think a separate breakout is appropriate at this point.
Well, as I reminded Mr. Cavetta about the issue of separating out water and wastewater, we're not recommending that we do one. We're just recommending that the professional working group add assessing the workability of this to their workload in the context of raising all the, given all the issues that you just raised, as they're looking at some type of regional solution, would a city-county rate board be an amenity or
I can't hear.
a hassle? And so I mean, I don't know that it hurts anything to ask the subsequent group to assess this, since they're going to have more time and opportunity to study these things than we did. But like I said, I'm open to the will of the commission. Dr. Mitchell?
Yes, Mr. Chair. Understanding that I believe that this section here is, it's, I guess, under consideration. It's one of those consideration items that was listed above on those, and that includes equity, financial, human capital, legal, and operation. Does it make sense?
Technically, this was not one of those things.
So,
the city county rate board was as recommended. The city council, as proposed to the commission, the city county rate board did have among its express purposes bringing equity to consumers, but it's not the same as the professional working group is going to be performing an equity study to help it determine the best approach to some type of regional structure.
no, Mr. Chair, I think I think I understand that. I guess what I'm maybe trying to understand, this potentially city county rate board would be under consideration of that working group based upon what we just approved. So would this make sense to be maybe the sixth item where it's just
I see
that
what you're saying.
consideration, and not a standalone, to Ms. Powell's point?
I guess I don't see any distinct difference in that. So for formatting purposes, I find them equally valid. Does anybody else have concerns one way or the other? I guess I should ask first, does anyone have any concerns about doing this before we discuss how we do it? If there are no concerns with doing it, does anybody have any concerns about including it on the list of issues to be studied by the working group rather than being a standalone recommendation? Because if everyone's okay with that, I'm happy to ask Brian to reformat this to have a 6th paragraph of issues that would be entitled City County Rate Board, and then the text after it would be assess the workability of City County Rate Board with the express purpose, blah, blah, blah.
Yes, and Mr. Chair, to that, I would just recommend a friendly amendment to this. As
I'm listening.
just a friendly amendment, I think this is already, I think it's getting us to a conclusion that this would be a recommendation. And it says, we expect that such rate board would consist of appointments from the mayor and county. I think that should be consideration of that working group to assess if it is appropriate for the mayor or the county executive, and not so much prescribe it to be. I think the working group would give us their professional recommendation towards
Does
that.
anyone feel an issue with just striking the last sentence of that? Any idea have a problem with just striking it, and it would be assumed that the professional working group would come up with the thing? Okay. All right. We'll take that as a friendly amendment. And I think I have Senator McRae and then Ms. Powell.
Mr. Chair, I just trying to understand, does the to be successful part, is that in coordination with what we're talking about now, or no, two different things?
To be successful?
Two paragraphs below. Does that have anything to do with what
Oh, that's not what we're talking about. We're just talking about this paragraph.
Okay. But do they have
Okay.
any, like, we're just voting on this paragraph, not the,
We're just voting on this paragraph.
okay.
And Ms. Powell.
Yes, sir. Would it, I'm offering a friendly amendment here, instead of rate board, rate setting authority. Because as it reads, it's a foregone conclusion that you have to have a separate rate board to achieve, to address the current disparity between city and county rates.
Yeah, hold on, Brian. I don't know that I think it would be a bad idea to call it an authority when it's a board, and a rate setting board is a thing, and an authority is something else that people have another set of expectations over. This is literally like a board, like a zoning board or a planning commission. It's just a bunch of people sitting down making a decision. It is not an authority. It doesn't own anything. It doesn't have any operational responsibilities or power. It's just a group of people who sit down, think, hear, listen, and make a decision. So I would really, I mean, if you want to call it a commission instead of a board, I think those are interchangeable, but it's definitely not an authority.
Right. Well, when I was saying authority, I meant the rate setting, the policy or rate setting. So if this is a board that is listening and making a decision, what decision are they making? And are they empowered with some authority to make those decisions? Is that
as we discussed, when we discussed it during the main part of the task force, I'm going to try to do this the way WSP did it, but if they want to correct me or add on, the idea of a rate setting board is all they do is they take the request of this is how much money we need from whoever is running the system, whether it's the Department of Public Works, whether it's the standalone Department of Water, whether it's a regional water authority, whoever is in charge of operations, annually they come to the rate setting board and say, this is how much money we need for operations next year. And so this is what we think the rates should be. The rate setting board takes that request They gather public input in the course of however they want to do a public hearing, mailing in, whatever, and they do their own analysis, and then they decide what the rate should be. Now, my expectation is that this is going to require, if it's done, it would require that it be, to be effective, it would require that whoever actually sets the rates has to take their advice if they're not the entity setting the rates. But that part would be worked out by the professional working group when they're deciding how they think we should be moving forward. And they may decide that how they're moving forward, it makes more sense for the other entity to also set the rates, or they may get public comment and public input that tells them, we like this system where you separate those two things. But either way, that would be a recommendation decision of the professional working group. Senator McRae? Oh, sorry. Ms. Powell?
So I think the word workability, because I still think that this is contemplating that a rate setting board would be put in place, and it is looking at the workability of such a board. And I think in the evaluation of whether or not there is a regional governance structure and all the things that go along with that, perhaps including any potential conflicts with that governance body's rate setting authority with such a board, there should be an assessment of the necessity of a rate setting board, not just the workability of one. So thank you for the clarity.
How about assess the necessity and feasibility?
Sure. Thank you for the clarity.
Okay. Sure. Okay. Brian, can you replace workability with necessity and feasibility? Are there any other comments, questions, or concerns about this paragraph? If not, I would like to entertain a motion to accept it.
I move we accept it.
Moved by Dr. Summers. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Mr. Barr. All in favor, please raise your hands, real or virtual, and keep them up. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. Oop, I only see 12 people. Okay, 13, got it. All right, this is accepted and we have added it on to the list from the previous section. Now we get into a interesting section where it gets very confused and messy. The one thing that makes it less messy is that whole big chunks of this are not actually recommendations, but are explanation for an alternate option under option E. And so before I take questions, I'm going to say that many of you would have read in the earlier versions of this the suggestion that a compact commission allows for many of the regional advantages of an authority without having to deal with a lot of the structural and mechanical aspects of an authority that were causing substantial problems and that we needed more time to properly study. And so the suggestion was that we explain in these paragraphs, starting with the task force recognizes that the ideal solution, those 4 paragraphs explain the concept of a compact commission and describe a Baltimore Regional Water Governance Board that could be granted authority and funding by both state law and local ordinances, and would be able to coordinate the operations of the water and wastewater functions as they're currently done by both the city and the county individually and separately. And so these 4 paragraphs are not technically a recommendation, but merely an explanation articulated so that the professional working group that comes after us would know this is something they should be looking at also, because if they can't make some of the things work in a regional water authority, if some of the due diligence shows that just doesn't work, this is another way to accomplish a regional governance structure that may be simpler to address. And so at this point, I would ask if anybody has any questions, comments, or concerns about these 4 paragraphs. And seeing none, if there are no questions, comments, or concerns, I would be open to entertaining a motion to accept them as currently written.
Mr. Chair, could you give me more time to read this
Sure.
section, if you don't mind?
Sure. For both task force members and our viewers at home, I want to take a moment to do my regular disclaimer. This is just room temperature water. It's just meant to keep the mouth moist and be able to keep talking as we move into hour 3 of the meeting. And so, Ms. Powell.
Yes, Mr. Chair, I'm trying to get to the comments that I made on this section. I did make comments on this in my markup, so just for the record.
And just to also for the record, one of the things that made integration of comments difficult for this section was between the time that it was circulated to the task force and now there was a realization that it did not need to be an either or thing, where it was if the authority doesn't work, then we look at the compact commission. We could just have the professional working group look at a regional structure, and they can be considering the only option E that was in the consultant's report And they can also consider this is another kind of option E. But by changing that, it made it difficult to integrate some of the comments that were made to sections of this that went away because it was no longer a in series, but now it was a parallel.
Okay. The comments that I made were along the lines of this reads as you know, a regional governance structure that should be, I think all of that should be included under any type of regional governance structure should be comprehensively evaluated and considered
Yes,
together
that
as
is what
opposed to
this
separately.
now does.
Okay.
That was the point. Is in the previous draft they were sequential, but now the language that we just approved up in phase 2, we say we talk about any regional governance structure. So the professional working group is no longer just looking at a regional authority. And in fact, the first sentence of this, the task force recognizes that the ideal solution may not be exactly the type of regional authority as described by the consultant. And this then goes on to describe another kind of regional solution.
Okay, let me think on that moment.
You think on that, and we'll go to Dr. Mitchell and then Senator McRae.
Well, I just, my concern, and maybe I'm reading this incorrectly, is that the first sentence, and then we can go into more. And I think we just need more, maybe a break to, if I could suggest to the chair, so we can actually read and reflect on this. Some of this language is, I'm reading new and maybe need more time to process through it. But the first sentence says the task force recognizes that the ideal solution may not exactly be the same type of regional authority as described by the task force consulted on the option E.
And that, I'm sorry, you've caught another editing mistake. That should be exactly the same type of regional structure.
Correct.
Not authority.
But as we look at the long term and that working group, you know, they're considering all options. I just think that the language here concludes.
They're not considering all options. They're only considering regional structures.
Correct.
Yeah. So the professional working group will be looking at regional governance structures, but what the purpose of these 4 paragraphs is to say, if you just look at WSP's report, the only regional structure they proposed was a regional water authority. And the purpose of these 4 paragraphs is to publicly say that we know there are other structures besides a regional water authority that still count as regional structures, and here is one.
I think that's my point exactly, Mr. Chair, is that this is a regional structure, and it should be. It seems like it will be considered by the working group based upon my understanding to identify one versus another. I would think it's under the discretion long term for the working group, and this would. I'm trying to understand the point of highlighting this specific structure for this, you know, working group versus letting the working group do their due diligence and provide a hybrid of different structures that could be considered, should that be the recommendation from that working group. But maybe I'm just reading this incorrectly.
Like I will take a note and say, let me think that through. And while I'm thinking, I'll give the floor to Senator McRae.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I was trying my best to look through my comments, but I think I might have had a conversation about you with this offline. And I went back to this. So a lot of the stuff that we have proposed or unanimously agreed upon has been recognizing that not enough has been submitted or informed to this group. And what happens is this gets more into specifics. So when you start talking about to be successful, that's saying that I'm framing like Corey, if I vote yes for this, that this is the feeling that I have about this specific thing. And I haven't got enough information from these working groups to be able to formulate and articulate a specific opinion. I think that it also digs into like enshrining things into state law. Before I would want to enshrine things into state law, I want to understand the larger scope of things. I think that everything else that we've previously voted on has basically said, we're not ruling out this specific thing or this specific thing. Let us get more information, whether it's from equity, whether it's from this standpoint, and continue this work group. This locks me into very strong specifics. And I'm sure that I also told you that I wouldn't be there when it got to that point. I just wanted to go on the record when you see my hand go one direction.
Understood. Understood. Are there any other comments, questions, or concerns? If not, let me ask both Senator McCray and Dr. Mitchell if your concerns would be assuaged if we eliminated paragraphs 2 and 4 so that it just would read, the task force recognizes that the ideal solution may not be exactly the same type of regional structure as described by the task force's consultant under option E. Therefore, other types of regional governance models should also be considered by the professional working group. For example, the state and regional jurisdictions could enter into a regional compact codified in state and local laws and or ordinances that creates a Baltimore Regional Water Governance Board. Like a compact commission, the Baltimore Regional Water Governance Board would be granted authority and funding in both state law and local ordinances to hire staff and coordinate the planning, financing, management, and operation of water and wastewater systems, and establish rules or regulations that would be followed by the city and counties that contribute water from their land area and manage, operate, and benefit from the system. So it's clear that we're just giving an example of another type of regional governance structure, but we're not over explaining to the point where it would look like we're somehow making this system better than all other possible options. Ms. Powell, then Dr. Mitchell, then Senator McCray.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think that it still leads to a conclusion. It's given a name. And the Compact Commission has a footnote. Perhaps that's the example with the examples in the footnote, and everything after should also be considered by the professional working group should be deleted at this time. In the first paragraph, everything after professional working group would
Well,
be my.
If you eliminate everything after that, then you've eliminated the footnote.
Well,
what are we footnoting?
So therefore, other types of regional governance models like a compact commission with the footnote should also be considered by the professional working group, and then everything else deleted.
Okay, let's put a hold on pin in that for a second. Dr. Mitchell?
Oh, no, Mr. Chair, I was going to say the same recommendations as Ms. Powell. So I'll defer my time to the next speaker.
Senator McCray.
She was spot on. I was going to say the same thing, deleting everything after the for example made me uncomfortable. because you're
Okay.
you're basically lining it up. You're saying what it is versus having them study it. So you can figure out an example that everybody has agreed upon, but that, for example, I think directs people in a certain space.
Okay. To do this. Well. All right. So before I ask Brian to make these edits, is there anybody who has concerns with deleting most of these paragraphs after should also be considered by the professional working group in the first paragraph? Does anybody have concerns with that? And by the way, if your hands are up to talk about something else, then wave your hand if you want to talk about what I just asked. All right, so no one has concerns about that. Then Brian, why don't you go ahead and cut and paste the like a compact commission part, yeah, or that. And that should go, yeah, right there. Like it. All right, and then we do all of this gets cut. All right. All right. So in that case, now we have a very short paragraph remaining to approve. When Brian scrolls up. So just those two sentences. The task force recognizes that the ideal solution may not be exactly the same type of regional structure as described by the task force's consultant under option E. Therefore, other types of regional governance models like a compact commission should be considered by the professional working group. Since this is now all it says, we should probably be explicit and say, therefore, we recommend that. And so, you know, you could insert after option E, therefore, we recommend that. And then that would get the same boldface treatment because it is now more formal recommendation. Does anybody have any concerns or questions with this wording as it is now on the screen? Because if not, I would ask for a motion to approve it.
So moved, Mr. Chair.
Moved by Mr. Barr. Is there a second?
Second.
I'm sorry, I didn't see who said that. Mr. Cabetta? Okay.
Yes.
Seconded by Mr. Cabetta. All those in favor, please raise a hand and keep it up. I see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. All right, we have accepted this. And now we are going to move to the penultimate recommendation. Just this paragraph right here, which has the footnote in the middle. So if we can read around that. Additionally, we recommend that in the upcoming legislative session, the General Assembly should pass legislation to establish the working group, identify its goals and timeline for producing recommendations, and provide financial support for this working group that will research and evaluate the threshold issues listed above involved in establishing a regional governance model. And then it goes on to speaks specifically to what types of expertise and experience the appointees should have, and asks specifically that funding include the allocation of resources for legal counsel, since we ran into that problem with this task force, that neither the city nor the county's law departments can advise it, since it is not either a city or a county entity. I see that I have forgotten to stop voting. If anyone else has forgotten to stop voting, okay, then I'm going to say we have a question from Mr. Moran. Oh, nope, Mr. Moran was also voting. Does anybody have any questions, comments, or concerns about this section? Okay,
Mr. Chair,
I
can
don't
we
know
move
if
down?
anyone
Is that all? Is what I'm looking at on the screen? It all is to this section?
That's all there is to this section.
Okay, all right.
And technically, this is more than there is to this section because the footnote in the middle doesn't count.
Okay, all right.
So if this is, oh, Senator McRae.
Mr. Chair, I also put it in the comments, and I believe that I also had the offline conversation with you in reference to the budgetary situation with the
Oh, that's right, the
legislature.
resources.
So
that's right. I'm sorry about that.
I just think you don't listen to me.
Yeah, I do listen. Sometimes I listen to so many things, I don't get it all written down. Brian, we had discussed expanding the term from provide financial support to provide sufficient resources for this working group, so that the option is there to provide either direct funding or staffing from other areas. Thank you, Senator. Delegate Stein, and then Dr. Mitchell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I second what Senator McRae said about sufficient resources, given the very difficult fiscal year the state is facing. Also, I wonder in the second sentence where you say the General Assembly should identify its goals and timeline. I guess I would think that the goals are the ones that have been already specified in the recommendation. And then also, I would think we should recommend a timeline. I think the General Assembly would look back to us and say, well, how long, do you think this working group would need?
Yeah, Delegate, you're absolutely right. In all fairness, the wording in this recommendation is older than some of the specific recommendations that we have already approved. So it's arguable that this phrase is now moot. So I know I don't think it would hurt anything to just strike this second clause of identify its goals and timelines for producing recommendations, because they're already written in to our recommendations above. So
Okay,
does anyone have a problem with that? Okay, yeah, I appreciate the friendly amendment. And I'm gonna yield the floor to Dr. Mitchell while I do an equipment swap.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just one more friendly amendment to this, and that would be on the fourth line where it states research and evaluate the thresholds issues listed above involved in establishing a regional governance model and making that assessing regional governance model.
So here's where I will be picky about wording, which is the issues are not issues in assessing a model. The issues that we're studying are issues in establishing one. Like that is the, I understand your concerns about looking too much like we're leaning into it, but what we are studying is what is difficult about establishing this. That's literally what we're studying.
I understand.
Yeah. So, yeah, we're not saying we should establish this. We're saying that we have to study what would be the impact or effect if we established this. Because if we study the impact and find it is unsuitable, then we won't establish it. Mr. Moran.
Well, further on that, I mean, would a friendly amendment be involved in establishing an alternative governance model? Or are you looking at studying exclusively a regional governance model?
Technically, we already said we are studying a
Okay.
regional governance model.
Okay.
Yeah. We're not exclusively studying a regional water authority,
Okay.
but yeah.
Okay. Understood.
Ms. Powell.
Mr. Chair, just building on what Mr. Moran said, the use of the word alternative, do you feel this captures both of the two options that we just talked about above? If we use regional governance model, or should it be involved in?
I think it captures both the concept of an authority and the concept of a compact commission. Although I would be grateful to Dr. Summers to point out if I'm over speaking on that.
No, I think you're fine. I think model is a broad term. It could encompass any kind of a regional governance system, I think.
Thank you.
Any other questions, comments, or concerns about this section? If not, I would be happy to entertain a motion to accept it as currently written and appearing on the screen.
I move we accept it.
So moved by Dr. Summers. Is there a second?
Second, Tim Barr.
Seconded by Mr. Barr. All in favor, please raise your hands and keep them up. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. All right, we are accepting this. And now there is one final section before we go back to do the summary. I will acknowledge that this is new language for probably everyone because this was recommended by members of the Baltimore City Council when I appeared before them on behalf of the commission at a hearing last week, where there were concerns about the fact that the commission there's the concerns about this first task force process did not include local councils. Did not include the Baltimore City Council, did not include the Baltimore County Council, did not include the Howard County Council. And so this last suggestion is that when we move forward, or when this issue moves forward, that any future bodies, whether they're temporary study groups like ours or permanent boards or commissions, any nominees by city and county officials should go through the normal confirmation process with the appropriate local legislative body for members of boards and commissions. And so I am lowering my hand because I am done voting. If anyone has questions, comments, or concerns about this section, I see Mr. Cabetta.
Quick question, county, is that in the plural, just to confirm?
In this context, it would be. County officials would mean officials of any county. Are there any other questions, comments, or concerns? Dr. Mitchell?
Yes, I just want to make sure that I understand this correctly. Are you stating that that selected members of this working group go through and I guess a confirmation process? I just want to make sure I understand.
That would be the request. Yes. That I'm sorry. Go on.
No, since this is not a task force or board or commission, this is an advisory working group. I don't. I guess. What is the precedent for pushing this through a confirmation process of a city council? I guess I would move to strike that language. I just, for my understanding, understanding the type of role that these individuals will play, a confirmation process would be inappropriate for a working and advisory group.
Okay. All right, Mr. Davis.
Okay. Wondering if I understand the intent, but I'm wondering if, I mean, there is a process that was established previously. I was wondering if there's a sentence added that just asks for consultation with, or I agree with Dr. Mitchell. I mean, a formal confirmation process, I'd worry about slowing things down and the like. So I don't know if there's a way to capture the spirit of what's intended without being overly burdensome or onerous on a process. Is kind of what I'm trying to drive at.
Well, without speaking for the city council, which has never been something I have been empowered to do. My suspicion is that this stems from a lack of formal participation in the group. That task force members were appointed by the mayor, not by the mayor and the city council, not by the mayor in I believe the federal term is with the advice and consent of the city council. And so if anybody thinks it would be easier to recommend that the councils be empowered to add their own representatives to the task force or the professional working group, in the same way that the General Assembly has representation on the task force. If anybody thinks that that would be better, that is, of course, the way that we could resolve this. I thought it might be easier to simply include a confirmation process, but if the concern is that that is potentially onerous and time consuming, it would certainly be quicker and easier to just provide local legislative bodies with a representative on the professional working group.
No, I think I'm thinking more duplicative, Mr. Chair. I mean, there will be an opportunity for the bodies to approve what is ultimately recommended. So I see it as the governing body does have a say in ultimately, because they're going to receive recommendations. You're going to have an ordinance that's going to go through the regular legislative process. So I guess in my mind, I saw it as more duplicative because of that role.
Well, this is where I will say I can't speak on behalf of the city council, but I can say that as a council person, it is often frustrating to have your only input on an issue be at the very end, after other people have put a lot of work and effort into trying to craft something, at which point, by the time it comes to you as the city council, it's a freight train coming down the tracks, and that makes it a little bit more painful and difficult to get in the way of it. Whereas if you're on board the train, you can have more opportunity to inject additional points of view along the way, and you may find that you had a chance earlier in the trip to divert onto a slightly different track, and that opportunity is often lost for members of the local councils because they don't get an option to engage until the track has reached them. So I throw that out there, but I think I should take more comment from first Ms. Medicus, then Dr. Mitchell, then Ms. Powell.
Thank you. I have two questions, I guess, and I'm not sure how, I guess a question and a comment. Regarding this, it just feels a little strong, and I'm not exactly sure why we need to make such a strong recommendation. In my naive way, I feel that just like everybody else, they all had a chance to come to all the meetings. They were all public. They had just as much opportunity as everybody else. So they don't necessarily need to confirm or be on the board to be a part of the entire process and have a say from the beginning until the end. And I would feel more comfortable, and I'm not familiar with government language so much, but could we just recommend that the mayor and the executives consider council as part of consideration for the nominees, or something less strong and definitive, and maybe somebody smarter than me can pick better words to say that?
That is certainly an option within our capabilities. Thank you, Dr. Mitchell.
Thank you. I would concur with those comments. I think city council has authority to call a hearing and get information. Maybe we can just say that that the city council will be would be informed of some of the appointees or so, but I think to go through the confirmation process, when I know the Baltimore City has authority to call hearings. They called me on many of them in my day, and was able to get requisite information as needed. But this early advisory group, I think the language is pretty strong.
Before I go to Ms. Powell, I'm going to throw out a question, which is, well, actually, you know what? I'll hold it. Ms. Powell.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. I would agree with my colleagues here. And I do believe that this is out of bounds of our responsibilities as a task force related to the House bill. So I don't think this is something that we should consider in our recommendations based on our charge.
Okay, well, then this is what I was going to ask, which is, would there be a greater comfort level with with this type of recommendation if it did not refer to the permanent working group or any other temporary study group, but only referred to any type of permanent board or commission that comes out of our recommendations, like the city county advisory board or the board of a regional authority or compact commission? Would that be more acceptable? Mr. Davis, then Ms. Powell.
Yeah, I agree with Ms. Powell. I mean, I don't disagree with the premise and what the request is. I think that the form is wrong, and there certainly is going to be an opportunity for the constitution of the group to go forward in future state. And that could be a space where, you know, future recommendations are made around constitutions. I don't see my role, quite frankly, as empowered to make a recommendation like this in this form. And so that's the uncomfortable nature that I have. Not that I necessarily am disagreeing in principle with what folks are raising. I don't see that as the authority of this body.
Ms. Powell and then Ms. Buckler.
I do think that both the city and I believe the county as well, or counties have already have a process in place for appointments to boards and commissions. And so again, I think this is out of bounds from our role here and what we have been charged with.
I will comment on that, which is at the city level, I can't speak for the county, but at the city level, the existing process for confirming members of boards and commissions gets a little wobbly when you start talking about things that are set up by the state. If any of this ends up getting implemented by the state in some fashion, and the example I will give is the current incarnation of the school system's Board of School Commissioners. They do not come before the Baltimore City Council to be vetted and confirmed, like they used to back when the school system was clearly part of city government. And that has been a very pointed and painful issue of contention over the course of the last quarter century or so. I suspect that if a specific effort is not made, it is not unlikely that the permanent boards and commissions that result from our work or from the work of the the professional working group, depending on how they are composed, they may not include automatically confirmation by the local councils. And I again will say, in my capacity as a former council person, that's not a good thing for structure. I think it's Miss Buckler, then Miss Powell, or Miss Powell, then Miss Buckler. I'm sorry, Miss Powell, were you?
Yeah. Ms. Powell, if you still had more to say.
Okay.
You're
muted.
I don't know if you were responding to me, Mr. Chair, or with what you shared about the boards and commissions setting, but all of that said, that seems to still be outside of the charge of this task force, and perhaps that is something that should be contemplated for the future working group that would assess if there is to be a permanent board or commission of some sort, that then it would be decided how the composition of that board and commission and how that board and commission would be appointed. I think it's kind of outside of our scope.
Okay, Ms. Buckler.
Based on the other comments that I'm hearing, I would have similar concerns. I think there's different processes within the city, within the counties. This adds a whole level of complication to something with we're trying to get done in a reasonable amount of time. Mr. Chair, I'd like to suggest that we make a motion to strike this whole section and take a vote on that.
Moved by Ms. Buckler. Is there a second?
Second.
By Dr. Mitchell. Please raise your hands and keep them up. Okay, I have, oh, yeah, okay, one. Okay, I've got 12. All right, so Brian, we strike this paragraph. And we are done with the main section, phase 1 and phase 2. And now we just have to go back and do the the executive summary. Would people like to take a break now and then come back and do that before we go to public comment? Or do we want to just push through?
Mr. Chair, I'd like to see us push through. I think we're pretty close, especially since we
Okay.
worked through the details.
Okay. All right, having done all the stuff below, let's just make sure that the executive summary is as acceptable as what we've agreed to in detail. I think, Ryan, can you shrink this to show the whole part of it and see if we can just do this as a chunk? Yeah. So this section is essentially a summary of what comes after it. We'll pause for a minute and let people read through and make sure they're comfortable. And then I see some hands up. Are those leftover votes or are those questions? Okay. When you're ready, if anybody has questions, comments, or concerns on these 4 paragraphs, just raise your hand. And just on the off chance that any of you ever see me sitting here looking down at my wrist and smiling, I just want you to know that whenever you see me do that, that's because my really fancy wristwatch just told me it was time to stand up. And I'm like, I wish, little watch, I wish. Miss Medicus, I can't tell whether or not you're actually have your hand up or you were just thinking with your hand.
Sorry, I'm just a very handsy
yeah,
thinker.
I'm familiar with the concept. I just had to be sure.
Mr. Chair, if there aren't any questions from the task force regarding these 4 paragraphs, I would like to make a motion that we accept them as written.
Can we take one more moment just to read? I'm still
okay.
reading through, if you don't mind.
Okay.
Mr. Barr, is that
No
okay?
problem.
Okay.
Mr. Cabetta?
In the last paragraph, the reference to 3 years, over the next 3 years, what's the reference for that time frame as opposed to a range of time? Why are we set on 3 years?
That was a suggestion from 3 of the members. I think technically 4. So if any of them would like to explain why specifically 3. Ms. Buckler?
It was a suggestion, so I think we just wanted to put some kind of time frame around it, and this was a very short time frame that we had for this, so it needed to be longer than this current time frame, but open to other durations.
Yeah, I would point out that technically over the course of the next 3 years does not preclude it being done faster, but simply gives it really has to be done by 3 years from when we make the recommendation. I don't know, does that help clarify, Mr. Cabetta?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. I see Dr. Mitchell. I'm sorry, I see Ms. Powell and then Dr. Mitchell. And Ms. Buckler, do you still have your hand up? Okay, no. All right. Ms. Powell?
Thank you. The last sentence of the last paragraph, I think we discussed this in for the other sections. It with the results informing the best possible way to implement, as opposed to
we came up with a different term.
Yeah.
What was that? Brian, what did we end up using in phase 2 long term at the beginning? Further down phase 2. Before considering instead of implementing or transitioning.
Mhm.
So the best possible way. Well, yeah, see, this goes back to the same kind of thing as what we're studying. Like the threshold issues we were studying are the issues around what are the difficulties in implementing it. This would be what is the best way to implement some sort of regional structure. That is what we would be looking for. That is what we've asked the permanent working group to do, is what is the best way to do this? And it may turn out that there is no good way, but we can't ask them for the best way to study it.
My thought is, I'm sorry, Mr. Chair.
Oh yeah, go ahead. You're still up.
My thought is informing the best possible way to implement some sort of regional governance structure as described below. It still is sounding, in that particular paragraph, it still sounds like the goal is to definitely implement some sort of regional governance structure, as opposed to, I mean, what if the outcome is that there an alternative governance structure is not necessary or feasible?
Okay, so it does. The question is, so I would frame it as, what if the best way is just the least really bad way? And like, we don't want to find ourselves in that situation. So how do we give ourselves an out if there's no good way? right?
Well, could we just stop at results inform, a suggested friendly amendment, the results informing the best governance structure for the regional utility?
Yeah.
Okay, I think that works for me. Does anybody have a problem with that?
No, I don't.
Okay,
Good.
Dr. Mitchell.
Thank you. Just one simple, friendly amendment. On the third paragraph, first sentence, it says Baltimore County Department of Public Works. Can we add and transportation?
Oh, yeah, thank you. And thank you for not making Ms. Buckler add that. Ms. Powell.
For the second paragraph, where it says takes measures necessary and feasible to make immediate improvements, I think we have discussed that the improvements have been ongoing.
To continue?
To continue,
improvements?
yes.
Okay. Any other questions, comments, or concerns?
Can you, I think from Ms. Powell's, just want to make clear, because I don't know if that amendment makes sense. It may be feasible to continue improvements in service delivery and take to make immediate out and say feasible to continue improvements.
Well, in that case, we can take to make immediate out.
Correct.
Okay, so it would just be to continue improvements in service delivery.
Correct.
Okay. Any other questions, comments, or concerns? Otherwise, I would be happy to accept a motion to approve the executive summary.
I'll motion to approve.
So moved by Ms. Buckler, seconded by Ms. Powell. All those in favor, please raise your hands and keep them up. All right, I see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. All right, and the opposed? One opposed from Mr. Moran. And with that, I think we are done with the piecemeal approval writing of the draft, and this would be an appropriate time to take, I guess we're not going to bother to take a break. We will just move into public comment. I see I have not lowered my hand from voting. So at this point, if WSP could open up the access for people to let us know if they have any public comment.
Sure. We've got our first person right now. I'll go ahead and promote Jorge to panelist.
All right. And I will pull up my stopwatch function. Okay. Jorge, I'm sorry, Mr. Aguilar.
Hey there, hey there. Hello, hello. Thank you, Chair Henry and task force members for, your continued work on this final recommendation, which we know has been an enormous effort. So we support the short-term goals generally, but we do recommend that you acknowledge city ownership of the assets as in the previous draft and ensure that the city has the majority of seats on the city county advisory committee. It should also be clear that any long-term work group should also have majority representation by the city officials as well. That's one thing. We do worry too that the term professional, which appear to be added by the county, is intended to keep out community voices from committee and work group. I don't think that's the intention, but we do ask that you provide space for impacted residents and workers as part of that future work. We appreciate your due diligence approach to the long-term recommendations. We still see some language that still sort of predetermines the outcome of that new work group is a regional authority. So there's still, you went through it, but there are some things where it's still left in. We suggest that the lines at the top of phase 2 section should say recommending how a regional governance structure should be structured if it is feasible, and the task force should strike all specific references to an authority under the list of items. There is the equity, financial, human capital, and legal that the work group will explore specifically. So it's in there and it should be tweaked. So we thank you and acknowledge the task force members have expressed real concerns about making the authority of fate accompli and have made efforts to ensure the phase 2 language does not predetermine a regional authority. There's one last thing though here, in the executive summary though should also express the significant threshold issues associated with option E that went unresolved for much of the work group. As written right now, it says option E shows promises which other options do not. Kind of very favorable. Option E actually has major issues, and that's why the work group didn't actually, right, like resolve these questions and went into talking about phase 1 and phase 2. As written right now, it suggests the work group just didn't have time to review the issues, but we did. We talked about this major threshold issues, so I think all of that should be articulated in the executive summary. So again, all the major flaws of I think how this task force began was that predetermined regional authority idea in the conversations the consultants had. So let's just ensure that moving forward, as the conversations and decisions happen with other officials who see the report, that they are not set up to just study again a predetermined outcome. So thank you again for all your work on this, though.
Thank you. All right. Brian, is there anybody else signed up?
Yes, I've just promoted another attendee to panelist, Mr. Wheaton.
Ah, yeah. Where'd he go? Ah, Mr. Wheaton.
Hi,
You're
thank
up.
you. Can everybody hear me?
Yep.
Perfect. So thank you so much for allowing public comment. And thank you so much for doing a racial and economic equity assessment before fully recommending a regional authority. I think it's going to be what's best for the city of Baltimore, do a full feasibility study, and again, a full racial and economic equity study to make sure that whatever governance model is chosen, it does not negatively impact Black and brown and low-income Baltimore residents. But like Jorge said, we also believe that having directly impacted people like low-income ratepayers and also local community organizations or nonprofit legal organizations that represent low-income ratepayers and also representatives of union workers should be explicitly put in the final report that the mayor or the county executive can select to be on the advisory committee. We understand that there was like Jorge said, a professional wordage that was in there, but also just want to make sure, uplift that, the mayor and the county executive can also, choose from low-income ratepayers and also community organizations as well. And then and if again, also want to lift up something else that Jorge said that, if there is an advisory board, that the city of Baltimore should be given a majority of seats on whatever new board or advisory committee is enacted so that the city and its residents, which actually own the asset, do not lose decision-making authority over critical issues such as rate setting and project prioritization over the asset that the city owns. Baltimore actually has banned privatization from water and wastewater system in 2008. So all of Baltimore's residents are serviced by the city city's water and wastewater system. And so since Baltimore does control that access, it is critical that Baltimore maintains control over the water and wastewater system so that all major decisions are in the best interest of its residents that it serves. But again, want to thank the task force for an amazing job, and also just want to thank the task force for, again, slowing down the process and doing a racial and economic equity assessment before fully recommending the regional authority. Thank you so much.
Thank you. All right. Who's next?
I do not see any other hands raised, Mr. Chair.
Okay. All right. If that is the end of public comment, then I guess what I would like to do now is entertain a motion to approve the set of recommendations as a whole. And what I think we can do is, well, let me ask you this. Is there a preference among members for a roll call vote, which combines voting with an opportunity to make any comments that you wanted to make? Or would you rather just do a straight up vote like we've been doing and then open the floor for comments? I'm happy to go either way for whatever people prefer.
I'd take the latter, Mr. Chair.
Okay. So in that case, I will entertain a motion for to approve the recommendations as we have discussed and agreed to them this evening.
So moved, Mr. Chair. This is Carla Reed.
Motion by Ms. Reed. Is there a second?
I second, Mr. Chair.
Seconded by Mr. Barr.
No, Joseph.
Joseph.
I'm sorry. Okay.
Yeah, he was
Seconded by Mr. Cabetta. All those in, I think a roll call vote is mandated by the legislation. Is that what you're saying? I guess I'm getting that in the
Yes, sir. Yes, Chair. This is BR.
BR is saying
Yes.
that the legislation requires a roll call vote.
Correct.
Okay. Well, we're still gonna, well, we've got, it's been moved and seconded. So I will just go across the screen in the order that the squares are for me. And we will start with Dr. Summers.
I approve.
Dr. Summers votes aye. Ms. Reed.
Aye.
Ms. Reed votes aye. Dr. Mitchell.
Aye.
Dr. Mitchell votes aye. Ms. Powell.
Aye.
Ms. Powell votes aye. Mr. Barr.
Aye.
Mr. Barr votes aye. Mr. Moran.
Aye.
Mr. Moran votes aye. Ms. Buckler.
Aye.
Ms. Buckler votes aye. Delegate Stein.
Aye.
Delegate Stein votes aye. Mr. Cabetta.
Aye.
Mr. Cabetta votes aye. Ms. Medicus.
Aye.
Ms. Medicus votes aye. Senator McCray.
Aye.
Senator McCray votes aye. Mr. Davis.
Aye.
Mr. Davis votes aye. The chair also votes aye. We have 13 out of 13. These recommendations are approved. I will take this opportunity to thank all of you from the bottom of my heart for joining me on this incredible journey of discovery. I have not sat down and added it all up, but I know we have spent something in the range of 24 hours in conversations about this, and that is not including all of the time we have spent on smaller meetings and individual meetings in and out of this. I got Mr. Moran's eye. The BR didn't catch you. I got you. I appreciate all of your willingness to serve on this task force. and the wisdom, the experience that you brought. I know I speak for myself when I say I have learned so much from you in the course of these conversations that I consider the time extraordinarily well spent. I also want to take this opportunity to thank staff both of the departments of Public Works and Transportation on the county side and Public Works on the city side for their support, and to Brian and Neil and everybody else at WSP. I know we gave you a lot of grief at points, and you can decide when you're home alone whether or not you deserved it. But I tell you that I do appreciate that you tried your best to help us come up with ways to move forward water and wastewater for the entire region, and your efforts are appreciated.
Mr. Chair,
To everyone at, oh, I'm sorry.
I just
Yes,
wanted
sir.
to thank, I didn't want to forget to thank you for your leadership in this process.
Thank you. I appreciate it. It was literally and truthfully an honor. I appreciate it. Ms. Powell, Delegate Stein.
Thank you for your leadership, Mr. Chair. And thank you to my fellow colleagues here and all of the stakeholders that have listened in on this process, and those who have given public comment. Just one question. The recommendations, will that be a standalone document, or will it be included in a report that recognizes those kind of principles that were laid out for us in other documents?
That's a great question. And I would have to ask in terms of the specific requirements of the legislation. I think the legislation requires that we send a report and recommendations.
Okay, thank you.
And no, I mean that I say that with using upspeak.
Okay.
to like I'm checking in with WSP and with Public Works staff, who I know have made it their job to be very conversant with all the specifics in the legislation. I know we're supposed to get materials to the mayor, the county executive, the governor, and the General Assembly by January 30th. I know those include our recommendations. I would expect that it would be our recommendations. It would be the report to the task force from WSP. What other? Oh, and I would ask that we submit a collated set of all the public comment that we received that was in writing. That should be submitted. There we go. On or before January 30th, the task force shall report its findings and recommendations. So the recommendations that we just approved are the recommendations, and the findings would, I guess, be WSP's report plus the public comment and the public input. So those would be our findings. Delegate Stein.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I first want to echo the thanks that other task force members have aimed in your direction. Thank you for your leadership. I know this was very time consuming and at times challenging process, but thank you for your leadership throughout the months and getting us to this conclusion. And just to follow up about the recommendations, I guess not to create more work for you and WSP on an expedited basis, but the sooner that at least the recommendations can be put in final form, then the sooner they can, convey to legislative leaders to take a look at it and consider for possible legislation this year.
Well, despite Brian's lack of certainty that we would be able to edit as we went. I think Brian did an extraordinary job of keeping up with the changes we made. And I think we should be able to generate a clean copy of what we approved that can be circulated to all task force members and posted online tomorrow.
Yeah, nearly momentarily, it seems
If
like.
not, yeah, if not sooner. So we'll have that available right away, and that will be joined by the collated public input and WSP's report. I would think well before the 30th.
Thank you.
As I've said so many times tonight, any additional comments, questions, or concerns? All right. Thank you all so much. Oh, wait.
I'm sorry.
Okay, so
Just-
you get the Casey Award tonight. What? One last question.
I'm sorry. I just want to make sure that we are doing what the House bill says, which was that we submit a report from the task force. We have a report from the consultant to us. Now we have a list of recommendations. Do we actually have a report that we are submitting? And
So,
it will have,
the wording that Brian shared was on or before January 30th, 2024, the task force shall report its findings and recommendations. So what I'm comfortable with, if the rest of you are comfortable with, is what we have just done tonight is our recommendations, and our findings would encompass the combination of the report WSP presented us and the public input and comment that we received from the public body.
Okay, well, I would like to ask that because there were comments submitted on the report that was submitted to us, but we did not receive an updated draft of that report. So if that could be that updated report could be submitted to us as Delegate Stein has requested, we receive final drafts of everything for review. I'd appreciate it.
Right.
Thank you.
Sure.
Brian, you got the,
Yeah. I mean, we were intentional about sort of the process so that it is in compliance with the bill that's being shown. And I think we made it clear, that the product that's required from the legislation, are those findings and recommendations from the task force to the principles, described in that writing, right? And so the earlier draft consultant report was a product of the deliberative process that got to that point, right? So it is not the task force's report.
Right.
It was the report from the consultant to the task force, which has informed the discussion.
And I'm comfortable with that. I think the point that Ms. Powell and Delegate Stein have made is that the comments that came from task force members on the report should be included when that is sent as part of our findings.
Right.
Okay. That's then Delegate Stein, that's what you're, make sure, we just want to make sure that when task force members did have specific comments about WSP's report, those should be included just like public comment would be included.
Right. Yeah. And they've been documented, if I may, as part of the follow-ups from the meetings when we did review them. So they've already they're part of that package and part of that process. So we're on the same page. And thank you for allowing me to clarify that, and thank you for the privilege of working with all of you. It's been a pleasure.
Not at all. So thank you all so much. I would ask for one last motion if someone would like to. I would be happy to entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Moved by Ms. Powell. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Mr. Moran. All those in favor say aye, all opposed nay, motion carries. That's the fast way to do it. Learned that one from Council President Clark many years ago. Thank you so much again for your time. Have a good evening.
Thank you.
Thank you.